We'll begin episode 4 in just a minute, but first of all, let's go back to part 3. Good news for the Thundercats, they have rescued Tor and his family that are the Thunderian refugees. Also, the good news is that Two-Time is defeated, but there's still a problem on New Thundera because the regular is still missing and things just get worse and worse. So, part 4 begins where part 3 leaves off. Now remember, in the end of part 3, we see Mumm-ra, who is now defeated, coming back from his trip to the Great Beneath. So now in his tomb chamber, he not only greets his canine pal, but now he's all tired and wants to rest in his sarcophagus after Mumm-ra had greeted him. So Mumm-ra told his canine pal that he must rest up, but before he does, he said he has a task for him, a favor, if you will. Then he goes to the cauldron before that favor can get underway, and that's when flashback we go back to part 2, just 2 episodes ago, where Mumm-ra had just explained that he had sabotaged the gyroscope. So without the regulator to hold New Thundera together and its gyroscope to go along with it, it'll be a matter of time before no thunder can explode just like what the old one did. Back in the present, in the tomb chamber of the Black Pyramid, that's when Mumm-ra said to his canine pal, "Wait, there's more. Let's not forget Torregra and Permira. Remember them? They're still on Third Earth patrolling the fortresses at the moment. That's why they didn't go with the rest of the 9 that went to New Thundera." So he then told his canine pal that Tigra and Palmyra must be eliminated too, and once all of them were out of the way, then both Mumm-ra and Mumm-mutt can rule both planets at once. But there's a problem. How's he going to do it? Back with Mumm-ra's favor for his canine pal, the favor he wants from him is to set the mutants free. Remember, they were exiled in Captain Bragg's circus train since season 2, episode 19. Oh, by the way, Captain Bragg and his Sidekick the Crowman are in this episode. We'll get to them in a minute. The reason why the favor was involved is because, according to Mumm-ra, he said that himself and his canine pal can remain on New Thundera to take care of Lionel and his friends, while the mutants can take care of Palmyra and Tigra themselves. So you know what this means? That means while Mumm-ra stays behind, he'll send his canine pal out on a mission. So that's exactly what he did. So with Mumm-ra tossing his canine pal in the cauldron to turn himself into the ball of light, and then before you know it, Mumm-mutt is sent on his way. Meanwhile, the Turning Rocks is in the Great Beneath. You remember that's the exact same place where 4 of the Thundercats had met up with Jagara since back at the end of part 3. We're talking about Lionel, the Thunderkins, and Panthro. Now remember, it was thanks to them that Jagara's out of the trance once again that was caused by you-know-who. So it's now because of you-know-who she sabotaged the controls and she had no idea that she actually did that. The regulator, you remember, it was stolen back in part 1 and it's still missing. Now, Jagar is getting worried and concerned, and she has every reason to because she just told the Thundercats if the regulator isn't found soon and if she couldn't get the gyroscope under control, that this can mean the end of New Thundera and it's in serious trouble. Well, to make Jagara feel better, the Thunderkins just told her not to worry about it and that Panther can fix the controls. Because, as they said in their case, and they're not kidding, Panther can fix anything. Speaking of Panther, he was asked by Lionel if he can fix the gyroscope controls. Well, if you really want to know the truth, Panther said, this technology alone is very new to me. It'll take me a while to figure it out, he said. Now, Lionel, who have heard the bad news from Panthro, he says, I'm afraid time is something that we don't have. Meanwhile, in outer space, you remember the circus train back in season 2, episode 19. Now, it's on its way to Third Earth, but it's not the only one because you remember Mumm-mutt, who's Mumm-ra's psychic. He's on his way there too. The moment he saw the circus train, he knew he needed a disguise. You remember Mandor from part 1? But that's not the real Mandor. That was just disguised by Mumm-mutt. So that's exactly what he did. So what Mandora did, oh, by the way, that's not exactly the real Mandora, but she'll show up later. She went right next to the circus train to see the mutants. Now, the first mutant to see Mandor, or so he thought, was Slide, the leader, and so were Jackalman, Monkeyman, and Vultureman. So what Slide wanted to know is what's she doing here? In Volgerman's case, he was more than happy to answer Sly's question. He said that she wanted to make sure that we're still locked up and not going anywhere, but that's about to change. That's because the mutants had no idea that that's not the real Mandora. She was really Mumm-mutt, who was Mumm-ra's sidekick in disguise. That's when all four mutants just heard the voice of Mumm-ra saying, "Pay attention. Your moment of glory is about to arrive in just a minute," he said. So, after saying this, the fake Mandora heads off. And that's when Captain Bragg, you remember him from season 2, episode 19, and along with his sidekick, the crowman, the moment they saw Mandora, or Captain Bragg pulled over, he wanted to know from Mandora what was going on, why was he pulled over, what the reason is, and etc. But she told him not to worry about it, it's just a routine check. Even though Captain Bragg had no idea at the time, but he also had no idea that that Mandora is not the real deal, and that she was fake. But deciding to think nothing of it, so he allows the permission for Mandora to search his circus train, or so he thought. Back with the fake Mandora, she's now on the top of the circus train. After she did that, she asked Captain Bragg to come on out of the circus train so that he can see her, or she could see him. So Captain Bragg did. Well, let's not forget the crowman, who's Captain Bragg's sidekick, he's with him. So Captain Bragg went first to please Case Door, or so he thought, that he didn't do anything wrong, and the crowman, who's Bragg's sidekick, demanded that he should call a lawyer, but by surprise, both Captain Bragg and Crowman should have realized that that Mandora was a fake, and so the voice of Mumm-ra just told Captain Bragg and his sidekick that it's a bit late for that. What the fake Mandora did was that she uses the boomerang to tie up both Captain Bragg and his sidekick. Now they couldn't move anywhere. So long story short, now that both Captain Bragg and the crowman are all tied up thanks to the fake Mandora, who was really Mumm-mutt in disguise, which he should have realized by then, that's when he needed to get help right away. Oh, speaking of Mumm-mutt, who's Mumm-ra's sidekick, he took the circus train. So after the circus train was sabotaged, it went straight to Third Earth. Well, speaking of Third Earth, meanwhile there, and of course the Castler's control room, there's Palmyra. Remember her and Tigra? Now, the reason why she's in the control room is because she heard the alarm going off. So what she did is that she contacted Tigra at the Tower Woman's control room. So she did. So in the tower's control room, that's when Tigra received a transmission from Palmyra. So he says, "Go ahead." And so she tells Tigra that there's an identified vehicle that's heading towards the Earth. So she went ahead and identified it, and by surprise, it's a circus train being sabotaged, but neither she nor Tigra had any idea. Also, neither Tigra nor Palmyra had any idea that just moments ago, Captain Bragg and his sidekick were missing. But deciding to think nothing of it, that's when Tigra told Palmyra to relax and that the circus train is on its way there. To their Earth, that is. The reason why Tiger said that is because he says he's probably bringing a zoo of bad guys around here. So after that confirmation from Tigra and the transmission ended, that's when Palmyra breathed a sigh of relief, or so she thought. So meanwhile at Castle Plondor, what the Thundercats didn't know, moments ago, the circus train had been sabotaged thanks to Mumm-ra's sidekick, Mumm-mutt, but they were not aware of it. So the mutants are glad to see that they're back to Castle Plondor thanks to Mumm-mutt. So even though Volgerman went first to plead his case to say that they're now back to their own castle, even though Jackalman, who agrees with Volgerman, he had no idea at the time. However, Munkin says, "I don't like this at least a bit." Then Slides goes next to say, "Well, let's just make the best of it." Now back with Mumm-mutt, what he did is that he uses his lasers to cut the cages from the circus train so that the moons can be set free thanks to him. Now remember, he was Mandora in disguise. We'll get to the real Mandora in just a minute. So back with the mutants, they cheered with joy to say that they're free at last, but Mumm-ra's voice saying, "Not so fast, you're not quite free yet." And that's when before the mutant's eyes was Mumm-ra, but not really, because the real Mumm-ra is still on New Thundera. It was just a projection. Anyway, back with that, he just told the mutants that yes, it's true he freed them because he says that he had once again had them indebted to him. So back with the mutants, they were looking at each other. At first they were confused, but they had no idea at the time. But deciding to think nothing of it, they agreed with Mumm-ra, or so they thought. So Sly, the leader of the mutants, was asking Mumm-ra what favor he has for them. Before the favor can get underway, Mumm-ra just told the mutants that he had, however, had the Thundercats on the run on New Thundera. In the meantime, back with Mumm-ra's favor, he just told the mutants that their job is to get rid of Mumm-ra and Tigra on their Earth. You know what this means? The mutants are now on their mission. Back on New Thundera and the Great Beneath, we have Jagara, the Thunder Kittens, Lino, Panthro, and Bengali. Well, good news for Bengali. He had just built a regulator to replace the one that Mumm-ra took exactly 3 episodes ago. Well, now that it's finished, it was now time to put it to work. And so that's exactly what both Panthro and Bengali did. Bengali did was to tell Panthro to make sure that the regulator that he created will fit. So Panthro did. First, the gyroscope was going to work just fine, but then all of a sudden, the reactor that Bengali built, it exploded. Next thing you know, the gyroscope was going crazy again. For the Thundercats and Jagara, this is bad news. So Panthro just told Bengali this gyroscope's going to go in any time. So Bengali, who agrees with Panthro, he said that there must be something that can be done about it. Now, Chugara, who agrees with both Bengali and Panthro, she says that there is something that can be done about it. She said that the only way to save the gyroscope is if the regulator was returned. So meanwhile, the Black Pyramid's tomb chamber, Mumm-ra, who watches it all happen in the cauldron, he said, "You're absolutely right, but there's only one problem. I have the regulator," he said. Back with Jagara and the Thundercats in the Great Beneath, that's when she told Lionel and the rest of the Thundercats that without the regulator, then this can mean bad news for New Thundera. So, in the meantime, until they do that, that's when the gyroscope continues to get worse and worse. If that's not bad enough, meanwhile at the construction site, just when the lair was almost finished at the Valley of the Stone Giants, of course, and long story short, things didn't get much better either, as Snarf, his nephew, and the rest of the Snarf's friends are being victims of a terrible earthquake and gravitational issues. Well, luckily for Snarf and his nephew, they managed to land on the ground intact, but unfortunately, Snarf didn't move far away fast enough as the part of the head had collapsed on him. Long story short, well, good news, the earthquake stopped, but things don't look so good for Snarf. His nephew was horrified, and of course, by accident, his nephew just called him Osbert again, and of course, Snarf pleaded his case with his nephew to never call him that, and of course, Snarfer apologized. So long story short, after Snarf had forgiven his nephew, back in the Great Beneath, Lionel's sword just told him that there was a problem. So Lionel, just like what any good guy would do, looked through his sword's eyes. So he did. What Lionel saw was unbelievable. The Valley of the Stone Giants, and of course the completed lair, well, almost anyway, has been a complete mess. And if things were not bad enough, Snarf's in trouble. After Lionel saw what had happened, he told the Thundercats to stay with Jagara in the Great Beneath and do the best they can with the gyroscope, and that he'll be right back. So he heads off. So, as always, Lionel did what any good guy would do. He projected a Thundercat signal from his sword, so he did. Meanwhile, on the Thunderstrike, the Thundercats that saw the signal were Chitara and Linkso. And let's not forget the Thunderian refugees. They're with them. They were rescued since back in part 3. So long story short, Snarf had forgiven his nephew. Meanwhile, in the Thunderstrike, we have Lynxo, and Chitara. And let's not forget the Thunderian refugees, because remember, they were rescued since back in part 3. So after seeing the signal, Chitara told Lynxo that Lionel needs help right away and there's no time to lose. So after Lynxo agrees, that's when the Thunderstrike heads to the new lair. And so it did. So back to the new lair, which is located at the Valley of the Stone Giants, the two Snarf and his nephew has seen the signal. So back at the grate beneath, Lionel, however, after he had finished projecting a Thundercat signal from his sword, guess what he did? He headed in the exact same direction as the Thunderstrike did. So meanwhile, at the new lair at the Valley of the Stone Giants, that's when Lionel had arrived first and saw Egbert and his pals getting Snarf out, and so did his nephew, but they had no such luck. So after that, Lionel saw Snarf and Snarf saw Lionel. Now that they're happy to see each other, that's when Lionel told Snarf, "Hang in there, we'll get you out of here." Then moments later, the Thunderstrike arrived with Linkso, Bengali, Chitara, and the Thunderian refugees. So Chitara comes out first and then two of the Thunderian refugees. So Lionel told Chitara to grab one beam while Tor grabs the other beam. And of course, the rest of the Snarfs helped them out. And they pulled and pulled and pulled. They're trying desperately to get the stone head off of Snarf. But unfortunately, Snurfer panicked and told Lionel, "Oh dear, we'll never get Snurf out of there." But on the contrary, Lionel did something about it, and what did he do? He uses his super strength to lift the head off of Snurf, and luckily he did. And after that, both uncle and nephew are reunited at last thanks to Lionel. Meanwhile, back on Third Earth and at Castle Plunder, remember the mutants that just escaped from the circus train earlier? They're now in their vehicles, a flying machine, a couple of sky cutters, and a nosediver. Now, Slide, the leader of the mutants, just told his friends that their next agenda on the list was to get rid of the snowman at Hook Mountain. Well, not just him, but also his sidekick, Snow Meow. Then Sly says, "Wait, that's not all," because he said that they can get rid of all the other Thundercat friends, like the Burbles of the Burble Village and, of course, the warrior means of the Treetop Kingdom. And once the Thundercat friends are out of the way, including Tiger and Palmyra, Sly says, then there'll be nobody else to help them out, he suggested. And so the mutants are on their way to Hook Mountain. Later at the Tower of Omens, there's Tiger in the tower's control room, and he just saw on screen Captain Bragg and his sidekick, the Crowman. Now remember, they were tied up. So, to his horror, that's when Tiger couldn't help but ask himself, what is going on? What happened? And where's his circus train? He had no idea. Well, back with the mutants, they had finally arrived at Hook Mountain, where the snowman and his sidekick, Snowmeow, lives. Back with Vultureman in the flying machine, by the time that the mutants arrived, that's when he told Slide, the leader, that the snowman's castle's just up ahead. Well, after hearing that, that's when Slide says, "Well, what are we waiting for?" So back with the mutants that are still in their vehicles, they're now on their way to the snowman's castle. The next thing they did is they started attacking it. Outside the castle was Snowman and his sidekick Snowmail. So by the time that the snowman found out his castle's under attack, so what he did is that he attacked the mutants with his snow lance, of course. Thanks to the snowman's lens power, that's when Monkey and other mutants just realized that the sky cutter was frozen in ice. Next thing you know, Monkey and other mutants just panicked, and as for Slide, the leader of the mutants in the nosediver, he moved out of the way, and of course Monkey and crashed. The snowman and his sidekick Snowmeow, so what Snowman told his sidekick to go get Palmyra from Cat's lair and tell her that we need all the help that we can get. So Snowmeow agrees and then he heads off. In the meantime, Vultureman of the mutants that was in the flying machine, he saw that Snowmeow was getting away and he got all upset. So he told his mutant friends to never let Snowmeow get away. So while that's going on, Vultureman started attacking Snowmeow. Long story short, while that's going on, back at the Tower of Omens and in the tower's control room, Tiger, however, decided to contact Mandora, the real deal. I told you we'd get back to her later. So when Mandora received the transmission from Tiger in the tower's control room, she says, "Go ahead." It is that he told Mandora the real deal, the bad news. He said that earlier he just saw both the Crowman and, of course, Captain Bragg all tied up and falling in outer space. So back with Mandora on her electric charger after she heard the bad news, she says, "I'm on my way," and the transmission ended, and then after that she heads off. Back on Third Earth in that cat's lair, that's when Pumara met up with Snow Meow, who's Snowman's psychic from Hook Mountain. So when Pumara was asking Snow Meow what had happened, and that's when Snow Meow told Pumara that his sidekick's in trouble and so is his castle. They're under attack at Hook Mountain. Okay, I'll follow you, but I have to contact Tigra first, and so that's exactly what she did. So, meanwhile, back with Captain Bragg and the crewmen still all tied up thanks to that creep Mumm-mutt who disguised himself as Mandora. But that's when, after not being amused with the crowman's joke, that's when something came out of nowhere and it's a boomerang and it belongs to the real Mandora. And luckily, she manages to rescue Captain Bragg and his sidekick. At first, Captain Bragg didn't even recognize the real Mandora until he saw it for himself. So even though Mandora appreciated what Captain Bragg said, so they're now on their way to Hook Mountain. Oh, by the way, I made a slip up since back in part one, so that's my bad. So anyway, speaking of Snow Meow, who's Snowman's sidekick, he's now on his way to Hook Mountain, but he's not the only one. We have Pumara and the Hovercat. So although it's confirmed, she, however, told Tiger back at the tower, so he's now in a Thunderclaw, and they're following Snow Meow to Hook Mountain. So good news for Snow Meow, who's Snowman's sidekick, and along with Pumara and Tiger, they have finally arrived at Hook Mountain. Well, speaking of which, there's still a battle going on between the three mutants and, of course, Snowman at the castle. So speaking of Snowman's castle, meanwhile there, the Snowman is still battling the mutants in a flying machine, a sky cutter, and a nose diver by Slide, Jackal-Man, and of course Vulture-Man. Surprise, Pumara, who's in the Hovercat, she was the first to arrive. But she's not the only one, because let's not forget Tiger and the Thunderclaw, he was the second to arrive. When the Tiger arrived, the first thing he did was to use his roller whip on Jackalman of the mutants in the second Sky Cutter. And by the time that he did, that's when Jackalman went out of control and he was about to crash. So after the second Sky Cutter crashed, now it's up to Mumm-ra to go one-on-one with Slide, the leader of the mutants that was in the nose diver. So back with Ultraman in the flying machine, he thought he should fly low enough so that both Tiger and Palmyra couldn't catch him or pursue him, or so that's what he thought. But by surprise, unfortunately for Ultraman in the flying machine, what he didn't count on was what was right in front of him. It's Snow Meow, who's Snowman's sidekick. And so what Snow Meow did is that he clawed the flying machine. So thanks to Snow Meow, the flying machine fell apart, and then after that, Vultureman landed into the snow, head first, that is. Now back with Slide and his nose diver that was defeated earlier by Palmyra, and what happened next is that they were both covered in snow. Vultureman tried to run, but he wasn't running fast enough, so he was engulfed in snow, and along later on Monkey and Jackalman of the mutants. Before I go any further, I just wanted to point out that I made a slip up. Mandora, the real Mandora, and along with Captain Bragg, they had went to Castle Plunder to get the circus train back. So by the time that they did show up later on, not only did Captain Bragg get his circus train back, so it's now time for the mutants to go back to where they belonged. Also arriving at the scene with the circus train was the snowman and his sidekick Snow Meow. So by the time that Palmyra had arrived and along with Tigra, she told Captain Bragg that those mutants belonged to him and his sidekick Crowman. And of course they thanked her for all the help that they needed. And of course Captain Bragg just told Mandora to have the tickets to the free circus. Better than that, Captain Bragg told Mandora that whenever she's on duty, then she can come. Unfortunately for Mandora, though she appreciates it, but she declines. So after that, she heads off. So after Mandora had left to do her other duties up in outer space, that's when Captain Bragg just told the Thundercats that he's forever in their debt. However, Tiger pleaded his case to say no, he appreciates it, but no debt is necessary. So Palmyra has her turn to not only agree with Tiger, but then she pleads her case to Captain Bragg to say it was all part of the services that they do, they being the Thundercats. So Snowman gives Captain Bragg the honor to take the mutants away back to the planet out back where they belong. Of course, Snowmeow, who's Snowman's sidekick, did the honors of putting the mutants back in the cage of the circus train where they belong. So good news for the Thundercats, the mutants are being recaptured. Meanwhile, back on New Thundera and at the Valley of the Stone Giants where the new lair is now disintegrated, that's when the Thunderkins arrived in the Whisker, and that's when they ran out to Snurf. And they said, "Are you okay?" So the Thunderkins was told by Snurf that they're making a big deal out of nothing and that good news he's fine, thanks to Lionel and along with his Snarf friends that got him out of there. Then suddenly Panthro and Bengali arrived, and that's when Panthro told Lionel the good news and some bad news. Well, first of all, thanks to himself and Bengali, they managed to patch up the gyroscope and its controls. So Bengali has his turn to plead a case to not only agree with Panthro in the good news, he said now here comes the bad news, because the regulator is still missing, and unfortunately for the gyroscope and its controls, they're not going to be holding steady for very long. So unless the regulators return, I'm afraid that according to Bengali, what he says in his case, that New Thundera is still in serious trouble and it'll be a lost cause. But unfortunately for the Thundercats, in Pyramid's tomb chamber, Mumm-ra not only has his turn to watch in a cauldron and agrees with Bengali and said that you're absolutely right that New Thundera is a lost cause because he still has the regulator since back in part one, but unfortunately not for very long because guess what he did? He threw the regulator into the cauldron and watching it disintegrate after pleading his case with the Thundercats that there's no way that the regulator is going to be recovered. But is what Mumm-ra said true, and is it really the end of the new Thundera? What will the Thundercats' future hold now if that happens? So that's the end of episode 4 and part 4.